In a world where workplace dynamics can make or break your career, imagine walking into a new job and instantly feeling out of place, like you're invisible. That's exactly what happened to one new Black employee who was met with cold shoulders, whispers behind his back, and the constant feeling of isolation. Despite his qualifications and eagerness, his coworkers made it clear he wasn't part of the team. But what happens next will surprise you. Just 1 month later, this same employee found himself in the unthinkable position, becoming the boss of those who had ignored and undermined him. How did this turn of events unfold? What led to his rise, and what does it mean for the future of workplace culture? Stay tuned as we dive into a story of struggle, resilience, and unexpected triumph. When he first walked into the office, James was full of hope. He'd spent years perfecting his skills and finally landed his dream job at a well-known company. But that excitement quickly faded as he began to notice the subtle, and not so subtle, ways his coworkers treated him differently. They barely acknowledged him in meetings, ignored his ideas, and gave him the cold shoulder whenever he tried to engage. It wasn't just about race, but it was impossible to ignore the silent tension that seemed to hang over every interaction. His attempts to fit in only seemed to make things worse, as if they were all silently agreeing to keep him out of the circle. James tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just the usual workplace adjustment period. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. What did they know that he didn't? And what would happen if the situation didn't change? As the weeks dragged on, James found himself increasingly isolated. The cafeteria chatter, the after-work drinks invites, he wasn't part of it. The others seemed to have their own little group, always laughing, sharing inside jokes, and giving him only polite nods when they had to. There was a quiet discomfort in the air whenever he walked into the room, as if he didn't belong. He began to wonder, was it him? Had he misread the signs? But no, something about the way they looked at him, the way they would suddenly stop talking when he entered, told him it wasn't just in his head. And then, one day, he overheard a conversation at a nearby desk, one that wasn't meant for his ears. "I don't know if he's cut out for this," one of his coworkers whispered. "They just hired him to fill a diversity quota." That stung. He didn't know if they were talking about him or just assuming things based on his race. But it hit deep. What was he supposed to do with that kind of pressure? Despite all this, James kept his head down. He kept working harder, proving his worth through results, trying to stay above the petty drama. But the more he proved himself, the more he realized something troubling. His hard work seemed to be pushing him further away from the people he was supposed to be working alongside. They began to resent his success, as if his growth was a threat, as if their positions in the office hierarchy were being challenged by someone they had already written off. And just when things couldn't feel more tense, an unexpected meeting changed everything. James was called into the boss's office, a place he had rarely set foot in. He had no idea what to expect. But what he heard next, it left him stunned, questioning everything about the way things were about to unfold. James walked into his boss's office, unsure of what to expect. The door clicked shut behind him, and he stood there, trying to read the expression on his boss's face. There was something unreadable in the air, a heaviness that made James' stomach turn. His boss, Rachel, wasn't usually like this. She was straightforward, always business-minded, never one to waste words. But today, there was a shift. "James, I'm going to be honest with you," Rachel began, her voice tight. "There's been some concerns about your fit here." His heart dropped. Was she about to fire him? The words hung in the air, cold and unnerving. She paused, looking him over with an almost pitying gaze. "It's not about your performance, James. I'm actually impressed by the way you've handled the workload, especially with how things have been. But, well, the team's been talking, and they're not happy. He froze. The team? He asked, though he already had a sinking feeling about what she meant. They don't feel comfortable with the way things have been going, she said, carefully choosing her words. They think you're stepping on toes, maybe even trying to make them look bad. You're pushing boundaries that they're not ready to cross. James felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just about the work. It was personal. It was him. They had been watching him, scrutinizing every move, turning his success into something to resent. He could feel the weight of their judgment, even in Rachel's careful words. But why was she telling him this? Wasn't she supposed to support him? Then Rachel's next words took him completely by surprise. I'm moving you to a new position. You'll be heading the department. His mind went blank. What? Effective next month. You'll be in charge, she clarified. There's a vacancy we need to fill, and it'll be yours. I think you're ready for this responsibility. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a complete reversal of everything he'd been experiencing. For weeks, he had fought to prove his worth, only to be undermined by his coworkers. And now, without warning, he was about to be their boss. But even as the shock settled in, another thought crept in. How would they react? Would they accept him, or would this only make the tension worse? He could already see the resentment in their eyes, the way they'd made him feel less than, as if he didn't belong. What would happen when he was in charge? James left the meeting with his mind racing, torn between disbelief and determination. But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder anymore. This was about proving to himself, and to them, that he was more than their assumptions, more than the labels they'd tried to put on him. And no matter what it took, he was ready for whatever came next. James couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As the days went by, the weight of his new role loomed over him, but with it came a nagging sense of dread. He had expected some pushback, some quiet resistance from the team, but what he hadn't anticipated was how deep the hostility ran. It wasn't just passive-aggressive comments anymore. The team started to undermine him in ways that felt deliberate, like sabotage hidden in plain sight. Emails were misdirected, meetings were missed, and important deadlines slipped through the cracks, all while his coworkers acted like nothing was wrong. Then one afternoon, as he sat in his new office trying to put together a presentation for an upcoming board meeting, a message pinged on his phone. It was from an unknown number. He hesitated before opening it, but when he did, his heart dropped. It was a photo of the office, his office, taken from across the street. A small blurry figure stood in the window, staring back at the camera. The caption read, Asterisk, they know you're next. Watch your back. Asterisk. James stared at the message, feeling the chill of it creep through him. Who could have sent this? And what did it mean? Was someone trying to intimidate him? Or worse, was it someone on the inside, trying to break him down before he even had a chance to lead? The more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just workplace drama. This was a full-scale campaign against him, and it was only escalating. But who would go this far? Was it one of his coworkers, or was there a deeper, more dangerous force at play? Either way, James knew one thing for sure. He couldn't trust anyone. As the tension continued to mount, he started to see cracks in the facade of his new position. The people around him weren't just trying to undermine his authority. They were actively conspiring against him. Every move he made was being watched, every decision dissected. His rise to power had made him a target, and now he had to figure out how to survive in a war he never asked to fight. And as if on cue, another email arrived, this one with no subject line, just a single sentence. Asterisk, you can't stop what's coming. Asterisk, whoever was behind this knew things they shouldn't. James had to act fast, but he didn't know who to trust, and time was running out. The final confrontation came when James decided he couldn't wait any longer. The threats, the sabotage, it had all built up to this point, and he was done being a pawn in whatever game was being played. The office was empty late that night, and he knew this was the perfect time to confront the people who had been playing him. The photo, the messages, the whispers. It was time to find out who was behind it all. He slipped into the conference room, where he'd arranged a meeting with the department's senior team members. As they filed in, their expressions were a mixture of tension and feigned calm. He could tell they weren't expecting this. They thought he'd crack under pressure, but instead, James was determined to take control. "You know what's been happening," he started, voice steady. "The sabotage, the threats. I'm not blind, and I'm not going to sit back and let this continue." There was an uncomfortable silence, and James watched as their faces shifted between guilt and defensiveness. Then one of his coworkers, Karen, broke the silence. She was the one who had always been the most passive-aggressive with him, always keeping him at arm's length. "James," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "maybe you're just overreacting. These things happen, you know." But James wasn't buying it anymore. He leaned forward. "You think this is some random coincidence. Someone's been trying to tear me down since the day I walked in here. And you're all part of it, aren't you?" The room froze. They exchanged nervous glances, and then Karen's expression faltered. That's when James knew. He didn't have all the details yet, but he was close. He had played this right. Before anyone could respond, the office door creaked open, and in walked Rachel, the boss who had appointed him. Her face was a mask, but there was something behind her eyes that gave her away. She knew this moment was coming, and she had a choice to make. Was she going to stand by the decisions she made, or was she part of the game too? James turned to her. "Rachel, you're the one who promoted me. You knew what was going on, but now I need to know, why didn't you warn me?" Rachel hesitated, and in that moment, everything seemed to fall into place. "James, there's something I should have told you," she said quietly. This was all a test. A test. His mind raced. A test. You put me through all this just to, what? See if I could handle the pressure. Rachel nodded. "In a way, yes. I needed to see if you were strong enough to lead, despite everything they threw at you. You passed, but there's more." Karen stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "You think you're the only one who had to fight for this job. We all had to play dirty to get here. You just didn't see it." It all clicked. The cold shoulders, the sabotage, the subtle exclusion. It was all part of a larger power struggle. But there was something else that James didn't understand, something far darker than petty office politics. Rachel finally spoke again, her voice low and steady. "James, what you don't know is that I've been here for years, and I've seen people come and go. I've seen power struggles, betrayals, and worse. And the one thing I've learned is that the game is never about what it seems. This place, these people, they're all playing by their own rules. You're a part of that now, whether you like it or not." James felt a rush of anger, betrayal, but there was something else too. Clarity. The company was a chessboard, and he was just another piece. But this time, he wasn't going to be controlled by the moves of others. He would take charge not just of the department, but of his own destiny. He looked around at the faces of his coworkers, each one holding their breath, waiting for his next move. "You can all keep your games," he said, his voice cold and final. "I'm not playing anymore. I'm here to lead, and I'll do it my way. If you want to stay in this game, you'll have to play by my rules. But just as he turned to leave, one last twist shattered his newfound resolve. Rachel's voice stopped him cold. You don't know the full story, James. There's a reason you got this job, and it's not because you earned it. James froze, his heart racing. What do you mean? Rachel gave him a look, almost pitying, and whispered, You think you were promoted to take charge? No, you were promoted to take the fall. James' blood ran cold. His position, his rise, it had all been a setup, and he was just starting to realize how deep the conspiracy ran. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun. James stood there, feeling the weight of Rachel's words settle over him. He was part of a game he didn't even fully understand, a game where the stakes were higher than he could have imagined. But as the truth sank in, he realized something. He wasn't going to be anyone's pawn anymore. The fall that Rachel had predicted, it wasn't going to happen. The very next day, James made his move. He reached out to HR, to the board, and began quietly gathering allies. People who had been overlooked, people who had been silenced. He exposed the toxic culture of sabotage, the manipulative tactics, and the games that had been played. In a shocking turn, Rachel was removed from her position, and James was solidified not just as their boss, but as a leader who would transform the company from the inside out. In the end, it wasn't just about overcoming the system, it was about changing it for good. James proved that resilience and integrity could break through even the deepest walls of office politics.